And my number five film is An American in Paris, and this came out in 1951. And this stars Gene Kelly and Leslie Caron and Oscar Levant, or Levant, sorry. And it's directed by Vincent Minnelli. Again, another Minnelli film. This one is, again, a one that is higher than maybe it should be on this list, but it is, again, a sentimental favorite, one that I consider to really be a guilty pleasure, and for many reasons. Number one, it takes place in Paris, and come on, who doesn't love Paris? I mean, it's got some of the greatest music, American music of the 20th century, all music done by George Gershwin. Come on. I mean, how can you possibly not like George Gershwin? I mean, I think I regard him, I consider him on the level of Beethoven, honestly. As far as I'm concerned, he is one of the greatest musicians of all time. And to have his music along with the dancing of Gene Kelly, who is one of the greatest dancers of the 20th century as well, and Vincent Minnelli and the everything. Oh, it's just a wonderful harmonious blend of art and an appreciation for it that is just so unbridled and enthusiastic. I mean, that's what really stands out for me about An American in Paris, despite some of its flaws. But yes, you've got Gene Kelly, who is very different from Fred Astaire. The two of them were probably the two most famous dancers in film in the 20th century. And, whereas Fred Astaire was more kind of classic and subtle and cheeky and witty, Gene Kelly was masculine and very modern and just very, very different, more youthful, I'd say. But it's apples and oranges. Some people prefer Fred Astaire, some people prefer Gene Kelly. I think I prefer Fred Astaire a little bit more, but it's just a taste thing. I love Gene Kelly. I have such a huge crush on him, even though he died almost 17 years ago. Oh my God, I love this man. I love his movies. Even though his movies, again, like, as I said before, they're very different from the Fred Astaire films. They're more about kind of the visual artistry, and they're more innovative in terms of the creativity. The characters are a little bit more, they're less defined than maybe the ones in the Fred and Ginger films, but it's just a style thing. An American in Paris, I do think, is one of Gene Kelly's best films. Um, you've got Oscar Levant. I have to mention Oscar Levant. He is a wonderful, neurotic character of a guy, and he always plays the same character in every movie. But he's just so great, and he's a great pianist too. I think one of the great interpreters of George Gershwin, certainly, and he does get his moment to shine in this movie. And there's also, I mean, this is Vincent Minnelli at his absolute finest. I know I said before that in Meet Me in St. Louis, he was a little bit more tame, but here he really gets to show what he's made of, and especially in a sequence that I'll bring up a little bit later. I will say the one thing that I never really got into in the film was the love story between Gene Kelly and Leslie Caron. Leslie Caron plays this French girl who he meets, and she's a ballet dancer. I mean, in real life. And she does show a lot of ballet, which is great because I love ballet as well. But to me, they just have absolutely no chemistry. Their story is just so uninteresting and just very thin and bland. But there is a sort of flirtation he has on the side with this other girl, older woman, uh, and the character's name is Mila Roberts, and she is great. I think the relationship between those two characters is one of the most complex love stories in any Gene Kelly musical, because for the most part, most of Gene Kelly's love interests are just sort of these perky girls that are kind of flat in terms of personality, because Gene Kelly is kind of an idealist, and you do see it as a theme throughout a lot of his movies. But this one is a very interesting one, and I wanted to see more of their relationship, but no, of course, it has to be more about the relationship between Kelly and Caron. But I can look past that because there's so much here to like, especially in my favorite part of the movie. When I first saw this when I was 18 years old, the ballet sequence, which is about 15, 16 minutes, the American in Paris suite, is it completely brought it home for me, brought me to tears. I was so moved by it. It is just this grand, epic spectacle. And it just combines everything. It's got wonderful American jazz, kind of orchestral music of George Gershwin, and you've got the tap dancing, the kind of modern dancing, ballet, the great artwork of great French painters and things like that in the background, the camera work. Oh my god, I'm getting nerdgasms just thinking about it. It is amazing, and it's one of the best ballet sequences I think I've ever seen in a movie. I would put The Red Shoes right above it. Gene Kelly was certainly influenced by The Red Shoes, but this one is right underneath it. It's just amazing, and it makes me really sad because movies just aren't like that anymore, and I really miss those great MGM Technicolor musicals and those ballet sequences. And my number four film is The Bandwagon, and this came out in 1953, and this is directed by Vincent Minnelli, another one I know, and it stars Fred Astaire and Sid Charisse along with Oscar Levant. And this is, to me, one of the great musical satires ever made in Hollywood. It's very similar to Singing in the Rain in many ways. And I always say, Singing in the Rain satirizes movies. It's kind of a parody of movie making. So not Fred Astaire, what Singing in the Rain is for movies, The Bandwagon is for theater and Broadway, because The Bandwagon is satirizing what it's like to be a part of the theater. And I think a lot of it they get right, and a lot of it is, over the top, obviously, but there's so much humor in it. The story is about Fred Astaire. He plays a character who is this vaudevillian song and dance man. He's middle aged, washed up, a has been, and he's trying to make this big comeback. And he is paired, kind of against his will in many ways, paired up with this ballet dancer, this very prissy, high strung ballet dancer who's all classical, whereas Fred Astaire's character is just this song and dance kind of guy, and Sid Charisse is completely different from him. And they're supposed to be doing this musical together, but it's done in this like Shakespearean, very serious way, which is completely out of their element, and it's just hilarious. The way everything is chaos, and none of the ideas are gelling together, and the way they have to kind of take all that, or strip all that away and rise from it and do something better is just, I think, hilarious. Um, Again, Vincent Minnelli does a great job here. He does a great ballet sequence towards the end that no one really talks about that much, but the choreography in it is kind of brilliant. It's by Michael Kidd, I think. And it's just this very contemporary, jerky jazz style that's kind of reminiscent of Bob Fosse. And Sid Charisse in that sequence is, amazing. I mean, I have such a girl crush on Sid Charisse, and I know she's dead as well, but man, back in her day, she could dance, and she was very sexy. I never really liked her chemistry with Fred Astaire. To me, their styles were far too different, and it never really worked for me. But I do like parts of the Girl Hunt ballet, and I love the way that it parodies film noir. It's basically a film noir done in the style of a jazz contemporary ballet, so that's really cool. And again, Oscar Levant is in it, and I love him. And the movie is just funny, and to me, it's kind of underrated. Not that many people talk about it, but in a way, I think it kind of equals Singing in the Rain. It's so smart and very vivid and just really enjoyable. And my number three film is West Side Story, which came out in 1961, and it's directed by Robert Wise, and it stars Natalie Wood, Richard Beamer, Rita Moreno, and many others. This is another film that has quite a lot of flaws, and it's probably higher than maybe it should be. I do think movies like Top Hat and The Bandwagon are probably more just better written than West Side Story is, but it's a sentimental favorite. I have loved West Side Story since I was a little girl, and as I said, there are things about it that I think are very dated, and things that just really take away from I guess, the tragedy of the film and the seriousness. I think seriousness is a better word. Take away from the seriousness of the film, but there are other things about it that are just transcendent, and so riveting. Moments that I have never forgotten. And, to this day, I've seen the movie so many times. And even to this day, I cannot take my eyes off a lot of the musical sequences. They are just so riveting and wow. They are wow. I mean, they have the wow factor. Now, the movie is, or I should say the show, the musical is basically Romeo and Juliet in a contemporary setting. Now, when I say contemporary, I mean like 1950s, but, contemporary for Shakespeare, we'll say. And, that's the thing that kind of drags it down for me is the love story. You know, in terms of Shakespeare, I love Shakespeare. I'd say Romeo and Juliet is not one of my favorites, mainly because I just don't like stories, and in movies or anything, I do not like stories that are about these wide-eyed, star-crossed lovers. It just gets really old, and I don't know, maybe I'm just cynical, but I'm always rolling my eyes. This is why I could never get into Umbrellas of Schönberg. I love the music to that musical, but the story itself just never quite got, I mean, it never did it for me because the two lovers I was completely uninterested in. And the same goes for Maria and Tony of West Side Story. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with the acting. It's very over the top. Natalie Wood and Richard Beamer are just like, oh, Maria, Tony. And it's just kind of like, okay, whatever. I mean, it's fine the first time and it is effective, but after a while, it doesn't hold up for me. And I think over the years, it gets weaker and weaker. And the same can be said for a lot of the performances of particularly the Jets and the Sharks, but just a lot of the ensemble is just not that well done when you compare it to maybe Rita Moreno and George Chakiris, who play Anita and Bernardo in the film. They are great, and they both won Oscars, rightfully so, because they were, I mean, they're great, and they really do bring a magnetism and a serious to it. And when those two are on screen, they completely, I mean, they crackle. And there's a scene towards the end of it, a sequence. I don't want to give it away if you haven't seen it, but there is a very hard to watch scene towards the end where Rita Moreno is just amazing in it, and it's a great acting performance. And if you ever had any doubts about her, she completely proves you wrong, and really proves what she's made of as an actress, not just a dancer and a singer. Incredible. One of the most heartfelt moments and tragic moments, I think, of the entire film. Now, in terms of the things that are really good about it, I mean, it has to be the music. I know I'm redundant. I keep saying the music, but when I say this music is great, and again, this is just my opinion, but I have to say I think that West Side Story has the greatest music of any musical ever. In my opinion, it's Leonard Bernstein, who to me is one of the great contemporary classical musicians. It just is. West Side Story is a masterpiece. It will go down as one of the great musical achievements, I think, ever. It's it's great, and I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, there are almost no words. It almost makes me speechless when I talk about it. It's like I don't even know how to explain why it's so effective, but it is, and just take my word for it. And another thing is the dancing, the choreography is great. It's very very modern in a sort of jazzy, contemporary, down and dirty, sassy sort of way. And it's also got like flamenco influence. Well, it seems like flamenco because, of course, you've got the Puerto Ricans against the whites. And also just the way that the musical sequences are filmed. There's a sequence at the very beginning of this film that is just one of the great moments in musicals, in movie musical history, I think. It is just, I mean, go look it up on YouTube right now. Just type in West Side Story opening, whatever, opening sequence or whatever, epilogue, and just watch it. It's like maybe, 8-10 minutes long. It is just so compelling. And the way that it builds, musically, of course, but also just the way the camera moves in a way that is just, it's very subtle, but it's just hypnotic. And there's almost no dialogue at all in those first several minutes. And you see the tension between the whites and the Puerto Ricans and the way they build off each other in this musical ballet, almost this sort of way is, oh my God, it's so great. And if only the rest of the movie could measure up to it, because unfortunately that they set such a high standard with that epilogue. The rest of the movie doesn't measure up, but it's still a great movie, and there are more great sequences. There's the dance at the gym, which is quite soon after that sequence, and then there's Cool, which is one of my favorite sequences. That's the name of the song, Cool. Great sequence. There's just so much to like here, and even though I do say that the some of the acting is dated, and some of the characters aren't quite as interesting as I wish they could have been, you can still be moved by it. I think the ending is still moving, and it's still very, very sad, and it does kind of stay with you. So I think West Side Story, I think almost anybody can enjoy West Side Story, even people who don't like musicals. I think you can get behind this one.